Greetings. Welcome to the first Annenberg Colloquium of the year. Before I introduce our speaker, I wanted to say thanks to a number of people who helped put this Colloquium series together, and that would be Jeff Baum and Diane Guffman and Abby Kahn, who have really done a lot of work in coordinating all the efforts of helping to get Howie here, everything arranged, announcing the programs and everything. And to the student hosts, Ali Bryan and Vicki Katz, who have been able to spend some time with Howie, and we'll be spending some more time helping to coordinate things from the students' point of view. Just a quick reminder that we have two other Annenberg Colloquia this fall. In October, Barbara Wilson from the University of Illinois will be here talking about children, television, and theater. And then in November, on November 14th, Manuel Castells will be here from Berkeley talking about the Internet galaxy. We have a couple of others scheduled for the spring, but we'll announce those later on. I wanted to remind you that we have the Annenberg Colloquium Special Edition, which is Jeff Baum's clever name for it that I like a lot. And it is tomorrow at 10 o'clock here in this room. Coffee and Danish will be served at that time. And Howie Giles will be giving a talk on law enforcement, communication, and community. So should be a special time, and I hope you'll all be able to come and to attend. Come on, sit. There are chairs over here for you. Oh, you're the that's the 12:30 teaching room. Sorry. Okay. Well, it's my great pleasure to introduce you to Howie today. Known Howie for a long time, and we've done a number of interesting things together over the years. Howie is professor of communication at UC Santa Barbara, jointly appointed, I might add, in psychology and linguistics, and he was chair of the department there from 1991 through 1998. He was formerly chair of social psychology, and head of psychology at the University of Bristol. And he is now also the honorary professor of communication at Cardiff University in Wales. When I heard him first say that, I thought he said ornery.
I did.
Knowing Howie, that didn't surprise me. But it is, in fact, honorary professor of communication. This is his vita here. It's 40 pages long. And I told him that if I went through his entire vita, he wouldn't have any time left to give a talk. So I'm just going to summarize it very briefly for you. He's written and edited more than 20 books. He's published well over 100 journal articles and book chapters. He's been the editor of Human Communication Research, a journal that many of you know and have published in, the Journal of Language and Social Psychology, and the founding editor of the Journal of Asian Pacific Communication. In terms of his honors and awards, he's been a fellow of the International Communication Association, a fellow of the Gerontology Society of America, fellow of the American Psychological Association, and a fellow of the Society for the Study of Personality and Social Psychology. He has also been president of the International Communication Association and president of the International Association for the Study of Language and Social Psychology. And he has quite a number of honors. I'll only mention a couple of them. One is the Spearman Medal and President's Award of the British Psychological Society, and the ICA, that is the International Communication Association Career Productivity Award. One of the things that I think he holds highest on in his vita, or cherishes most, is the fact that he is a sworn officer of the Santa Barbara Police Force. And one that is an honor that isn't in his vita, but one which I think he also values quite highly, is the most important Great Guy, Terrific Friend Award bestowed upon him by Peter Mudge.
I'll take that.
It's a real pleasure to have you with us here, Howie. We're looking forward to your talk, Aging and Cross-Cultural Communication.
Thank you.
Howie Giles.
Thank you for that very gracious introduction. I'm very honored to be here in this particular series. I was here some time back, maybe 10 years ago, and had a terrific visit, so it's great to see old friends, and I look forward to making new ones here. As a kind of little subtitle to this talk that is kind of important and threads itself through the talk, is this notion that talk can age. And an example of this is 7 or 8 years ago, I lost 43 pounds for one of the reasons Peter mentioned. I became very fitter than I was in my 20s. In fact, I was the best I could be in mid-90s. And I went back on sabbatical to my home department in Cardiff, as we say. And I went in looking forward to meeting people I had not met for 20 years. I walked in, and up comes Charles down the corridor, and I said, "Charles, nice to see you, Chuck baby." I changed a little bit. And he said, "Oh, my God, you look old." "Oh, my God, you look old." And he didn't stop there. He went on, and he shoveled it on and on and on and on and on and on. Okay. Now, I went up to the men's room, the bathroom, to look in the mirror to check myself out. Okay. And this talk, aging talk, had quite an effect on me. I went downstairs there and I met a woman who I'd met 2 months earlier and seen me a little bigger and said, "Wow, you look good." Dismiss that. Dismiss that. Okay. How people talk to you about age, you'd think would be in many ways not so direct. The more data we gather about this, the more we find that people are quite explicit about talking about age and decrement. I came into LAX on December from a visit to Britain and went through customs. Guy opened my passport. He looked at me and he said, "You're over the hill, you're over the hill." But of course you can't. You can't. Okay. So I thought, well, yet another twist down. And basically, point being here is that while communication can be very constructive and supportive, it can also, to go out on a limb here, also kill under certain conditions and age one in many ways. I think this is an important topic that communication people haven't talked sufficiently about. We will note here, later out just the other week, that of course longevity is on the increase. Women outdoing men, ethnic difference here, which makes this a very interesting topic for us. Huge socio-demographic changes. We are living longer. There's more of us living longer that we have to contend with. In Santa Barbara here, we have large differences that are going to occur over the next 25 years that we know about. It's also going to occur more proportionally in other cultures. I mentioned Korea here, because we're going to hit Korean data a bit later. And 1999, Kofi Annan talked about the silent revolution in UNESCO and the UN. These changes of longevity and these changes in the number of old people is happening as a kind of silent revolution. And in 1999, he declared the International Year of Older People from the UN, which passed our discipline by in many ways. So I think it's an important area. What I'm going to do today is talk about our empirical background and theoretical background, and talk about the Pacific Rim program of research that we've been looking into about this, and then look at some implications. So let's stand it there, if you like. Here's a nice little map of the lifespan from young students' perspective in the States. Okay? It tells an interesting story that kind of goes along with what I've said. Here young students are asked with targets of every 5 years of age, from 5 up to 100, to rate the status, perceived status of people at different ages in general, gross caste. And we see that status goes up to 30 and then plummets, nose dives down 1090, there's a gender difference there that goes wrong with traditional sex role theory, sadly. And zips up here when you get to communicate on President Bush or the Queen in Britain that you've achieved 100. Interesting issue in itself. But here we have a little map of the lifespan that suggests, in terms of status in our society anyway, amongst young people, it goes down from about 30 quickly. 30 by Kay-Doe is kind of interesting too, because she asked students to examine 64 different kinds of social identities from ethnic, occupational, etc., age kind of identities. And the one interesting thing here is the stigma cluster, that she calls, where older people are clustered as stigmatized and associated with smokers and alcoholics and whatever, kind of gives you a frame for that. So, look, in intergenerational communication, it's kind of extreme here. A guy called Ashley Brilliant will bring up a number of times he comes up with his brilliant thoughts, as he calls them, publishes out in Santa Barbara. There's a little aphorism here. When you plan a journey from your mind into mine, when you plan that journey communicatively, remember to allow for the time difference. And unfortunately, a lot of our data and other people's data is showing that young people allow for that time difference in a decremental fashion. Just a quick gloss of studies in communication looking at young adults who listening to audio tapes or looking at videotapes, negatively evaluate older sounding speakers on a number of dimensions, interpret neutral messages that they say, if anything is neutral, ageistly. If I have to say, well, I don't really know what to say about this particular issue, if it's an older person, they'll say, losing it, marbles. Okay. Whereas with the younger person, there they are, sensitive to the nuances and weighing up this and weighing up that. We'll ask different information of older people. If in a car accident, car being consistently in a lot of communication aging research, ask different questions about the responsibility of the person if it's an elder person, and an older person is also being ageist if they're younger too, interestingly with respect to alcohol. But the person's competence is called into question, not only sensory competence but intellectual competence. You recall messages less effectively if they're from an older person, controlled for. Also, older people, younger people feel that older people stereotype them in a very negative fashion and often patronize us. You'll see the in-group, out-group way of framing that. But they also don't accommodate to us. They, as the term is often used, they just don't accommodate to us at an optimal level, and we'll look at a bit of that later, and don't listen to us, which is something difficult to manage communicatively. You think people are not listening to you as such. So there's a kind of profile, a kind of sad profile in many ways, but I wish I had time to talk through this. So look at some of the images that have been evoked in my culture.
He's saying this company all for good. And you know what I can't open? Cabinets. Can he say that? You know what else scares me? Everything. Get that one. Got you. You got enough time for the other one? Oh no! That one's snowing down. Oh, good. What's wrong with it? Before I even said it. What you pussycat? Ow, 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 ow. What you pussycat? Oh, God, no.
Finally, great, folks. Now, all the contestants are going to receive extra servings of honey mush. But there can only be one winner. And since there's already standing here, what the heck?
Wow, a free auto.
Keep reading.
Oh. Get this job to the funeral home before they try to back up.
So many images there. We're going to talk just around that one. That is, in many senses, prototypical of pop culture and images. There was, we'll talk about that a bit later. But when it comes to the issue that in the United States and in many Western cultures, you really have Anthony Pazel's quote, "Growing old is like being increasingly penalized for crime you haven't committed now." At the moment, I'm talking in a very contained fashion about aging. This obviously is an experience of all old people, but it is a sense of communicative message that one gets as one moves up the lifespan. That there is, in some way, stigma attached to the situation of aging here. Is not actually brilliant one, kind of like decrement issue again. What's left of me, we very much enjoy getting together with what's left of you. We've been working with what we call a communication predicament model, drain pipe model of life, that is quite straightforward. When you have an intergenerational exchange, and a young person encounters an older person, and let us for the moment talk about older people here. In our culture, is 65 and older. An interesting question is how you categorize someone as older and what age. Okay, a frightening thing, as perhaps we'll see a bit later, perhaps, if you buy into all this stuff. Stereotype expectations are very often triggered. We mentioned that some of the communicative expectations are kind of negative. So that speech towards the older person often is patronizing, often is based on negative communicative stereotypes we have and subtypes of older people. That if enough people tell you you're past it, like has been told me, oh, you're over here, and you buy into that, you get enough messages from a number of people, we're going to have some outcomes, unless you're an extremely strong person here as such. We've also been doing some work looking at when patronization of older people occurs. And we've, at the moment, of course it's situationally determined, but we found patronization occurring with people who are 50. So, speech behavior towards the younger person, we come into an interesting area now of self-stereotyping. When you take on the characteristics, if enough people are telling you you're getting past it, then you may well take on the characteristics of what it is to be older. Another little actually brilliant aphorism here, I think, nice title here, don't time me down. Okay? As you move on in life, okay? From grad student to professor, different expectations come into being in terms of presenting oneself. For some reason, as time passes, I'm expected to play the roles of increasingly older people. So here then, we have constrained opportunities for communication, will actually accentuate age stereotyping, which leads to, for an older person, lower personal control and self-esteem. They're extremely strong, and can result in physiological changes as such. In fact, in one study we just conducted, making age salient and negatively so by having magazines around the room, like this little magazine around, oh, enough of these, for instance. Okay, these are your typical birthday cards you can have a look at. That'll keep you amused. Okay. If those around, which will make age salient and negatively so, and when you're the recipient of these, you'll be very graciously accepted. Okay. In fact, what we have found is that the person will look, sound, move, and feel 5 years older. If you have enough of these instances happening, this is part of the social construction of aging as such. And one recent study that has had some media attention came out in the JPSP, Journal of Personality and Social Science, last month, looked at 600 people 50 years and older in 1975, and at that point they were given a small little 5-item attitude to your own aging scale. As you get older, you feel less useful. Other items relating to how your memory goes as you get older. 23 years later, examined survivability and found that those with more positive self-perceptions about their own aging lived on average 7.5 years longer. That, in fact, greater than has been estimated with low blood pressure and cholesterol and smoking and exercising. Okay? And this effect remains when you retain in the analysis age, gender, sex, and even functional health than those issues. So age is, when made salient, says what I've talked about, perhaps in better terms.
Yeah, I'll just clear the decks here and I'll be right with you. I'll put this in the car. You know? Jim and McBennett, this is Maurice Minifield.
Hey, Maurice.
McBennett, I have a check here from the Social Security Administration. You put in for that?
Belated happy birthday to you.
$284. What the hell am I supposed to do with $284?
Endorse, deposit, credit it to your account.
I'm not ready to collect Social Security. I don't need it. Hell, I don't even believe in it.
Look, you got it coming. Golden years, Maurice.
Golden years, my ass. I don't need your old age benefits. You people are trying to kill me.
That's not straight.
All of you with your special benefits and your bonuses and your old... You're sticking pins in my doll.
I think that's a good illustration of the effect these kind of communicative messages, even when they're supposedly caring and supportive. I could use the $284, okay, quite easily. But even that symbolic of aging, that builds into our model there. Feature of the communication predicament of aging model is that it highlights language and communication as central to the social construction of aging. Features intergenerational communication as an intergroup process. Features it as problematic, perhaps all too often, and that communication can have health consequences, arguably, for older people. So, we look at the background theoretical framework. Given this, our work moved into Asia because of all those negative sentiments. We became kind of interested in moving to Asia to look for a different model of aging that we could work off. Okay, perhaps a more healthier model of aging. We'll go into that in a second. So, the question is, are other cultures more or less respectful of older people than in the USA, mainstream USA? We suggest there are situations that are arguably worse than the USA, and I've got pop cultural data here on the British, where it originally came from. Okay. Inuits, as well as gay culture. A number of societies have traditionally moved their older people out into the wilderness, into the tundra, into the jungle after a certain age, as becoming less effective for community. Okay. Also, we've got an article coming out, if you're interested, in the next issue of General Communication on aging and gay culture. Here's in Santa Monica Boulevard, 35th Annual Gay and Lesbian Pride. Interesting here, this woman saying, where are all the gay old people? Where are they? What are we doing to them? And our data suggests that in that particular society, with looksism being very much valued, that older people in that particular cultural context are even in a worse position than heterosexual societies. Second that. So then might they be better? Arguably, Islamic societies and in Confucian and Buddhist societies in East Asia. Here in the Quran, we have a quote, your Lord has commanded that you worship none but him and be kind to your parents. If either of both of them reach old age with you, do not say hoof to them, right? Or chide them, walk in communication. Speak to them in terms of honor and kindness. Treat them with humility and say, my Lord, have mercy on them, for they did care for me when I was little. Notice the intergroup pronouns again here, them and they, as such. Here is a society where we say that a culture, the veneration of older people may be well better there if we replicated our studies in Muslim cultures. Maybe we'd find a very, very different pattern. Okay? We also might find it in certain East Asian cultures. Because of the notion of filial piety, as such, we don't have that notion, that label in English. Filial piety, okay? That requires older members to be venerated for their age and grace, and also has implications for older people to care for younger people as such, of course. And also, traditionally extends to older people in general, okay? Not just the family. Such. Apparent practice in Japan, Korea, China, Korea again, and many Asian sections, and in other ones that have their own particular term. Data here are equivocal in the sense that there are signs that filial piety might be eroding such. Filial piety, then what actually does it mean? But before we get to that, it's interesting that way back in 905 there was a Japanese poem, if only when one heard that old age was coming, one could bolt the door. Not yet, sunshine. Okay. So even in the past there's been notions of aging that's kind of negative there. Used to meeting. Also, in Japan, other societies, we have ancestor worship, and in our own terms, we have it in our own culture too, but not to the extent as in Japan. A grad student of mine who's now working out in Nagoya sent me his altar for his ancestors. He sent me a picture where each day you have to light incense, and you have to have flowers, and you lay down certain kinds of food, and he had said in his email to me, here's a picture of it, he said, oh, I feel awful, awful, awful. We are so bad, my spouse and I, that there is no food on here today. So in the home, and often these are mobile, you'll take them from home to home if you are transient in that sense, that there is constant reminder and veneration of older people as such. There is a scale of filial piety, David Ho's filial piety scale, coming out of Hong Kong, translated as such. The language is kind of interesting because it gives us a view of what filial piety is. Sons and daughters should not go too far away while their parents are living. The main reason not to do dangerous things is to avoid getting your parents worried. Okay? The great debt that you have to repay your parents is as boundless as the sky. No matter how their parents conduct themselves, no matter what they do, okay? Sons and daughters must respect them. Spreading one's fame to glorify one's parents should be the most important reason for getting ahead. There's no crime worse than being unfilial. Crime. And one, it's kind of interesting. There's a quarrel between one's wife and one's mother. The husband should advise his wife to listen to his mother. Okay. Our biting questions really were, empirically, some data. Do young people's views of older people differ around the Pacific Rim? We hope they differ in some ways. Okay. Is intergenerational communication climate also perceived to be more healthy in East Asian societies? Not that we want to conglomerate societies that are extremely different historically, politically, and socially as East Asia bloc. We can get to that, but there does seem some consistency in veneration of elder people there. Young and older adults differ in their view, and is there a real social problem relating to health going on here? So happily, I had a wonderful group of researchers to work with. Some people here will know some of these guys and gals. What I'd like to do first is talk about a couple of studies we've done on filial piety, because we expect to find differences in filial piety, west-east in gross terms, as well as age stereotypes. Then look at how people report their beliefs about communication. We had to start with reports about beliefs. Obviously, we'd like to do interactional studies that across 14 different cultural sites with different languages. It's very difficult to do this kind of work. So we started off with people's reports and beliefs about interactions they've had with older people, which we think are important guidelines for how people actually do interact. And then we'll look at links with psychological well-being. Obviously, we'd like to follow through with physical well-being as well, but psychological well-being is extremely important to physical well-being, as well as being psychologically important. So that's what we'll quickly look at. We did a filial piety study across context here. In the green, we have the ranking given by Hofstadter for these cultures in terms of individualism and collectivism, an interesting concept at the present time and quite provocative in cultural and cross-cultural communication and psychology. And we looked at AV blocks, Western ones, and Eastern blocks. We didn't use Ho's scale because Westerners would react and find it very difficult to react to Ho's scale. So we constructed a scale, kind of simple scale, that I will, young people should, young adults who I know should, other adults, older adults expect, on the right-hand side, look after. So I will look after older people, I'll financially assist them, I'll respect them because of their age, and I'll listen patiently, etc. Please and kind of make them happy, retain contact, crisscross across this. The main findings here that all cultural groupings endorse filial piety. It is not the province of the Eastern context. Or we may not have a label for it, but we kind of respect our older people in general. Women some also. Interestingly, and as one would predict, East Asians prepared to give more practical support to older people and their parents than Western and the Western cultures. However, and somewhat surprisingly to us, this particular point, we found Westerners in contrast, and here's the first little ripple in the pond, if you like, is that Westerners endorse more contact and communication with older people. Westerners, Americans, more contact, okay, than Easterners. Interestingly also, East Asians said, we know what older people expect of us, and we'll give them a fair amount. We won't give them all they want. Okay? Westerners, interestingly enough, said, we want to know what older people expect. It's actually the same as East Asians, so we'll give them a bit more. Now, maybe East Asians are more honest, more integrity about their answers in this situation. I don't know. That was an interesting finding in itself, too. So, we moved on to stereotype studies before we come to communication studies themselves. And conducted a number of studies in Western contexts and Eastern contexts, as you'll see there. And asked students in this particular study to rate young adults. We gave them ages. In other studies, we let them do it themselves, which is interesting. Okay. Middle-aged and older adults, such. On to basic sets of traits dimensions that appear in the gerontological literature, and we found support with in faction analysis, confirmatory faction analysis, personal vitality traits, healthy, boom, 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 okay, and general kind, generous and wise. As an example, one study looked at Australian, Western versus Japanese data, okay, on personal vitality. Okay. Japanese rated younger, middle-aged, and older as going down in terms of vitality, as one might predict. Australians, however, interesting, significantly give the older targets, the middle-aged and elderly, attribute more vitality than the Asian context here, and that occurred in both instances. So here's another little ripple in that pond. When it comes to benevolence, wisdom, generousness goes up linearly, and again, that difference is not significant. Okay. Australians, as identified, attribute more benevolence to older and middle-aged people. So here's, hang on now, this is a different picture emerging here. If you look at some Japanese magazines, you will find a lot of interesting folk psychology, pop culture going on here, where very often with the notion of decrement in some people's mind is that people are, as they grow older, and particularly beyond a certain age, becoming more childlike. The decrement goes on. And here is a middle-aged, young adult, middle-aged guy talking to a very older person and a child in this one terms. You've got the same problem, same issue. Older person talking to someone, birds of a feather joined together, says in Japanese there. Yeah. Here's someone in context here saying, now we must be keen, dear, mustn't we? So we translated. This guy hasn't got any thoughts, okay, as an older person. Even represented now, and these are just a few months old, Here's another interesting one. Here's a guy reading a newspaper on the underground about people who are disadvantaged in society and how we've got to help them. He's hiding himself from this woman who maybe needs help or whatever, or maybe doesn't need help. He's like, I don't understand, I can stand, I'm old enough, don't put me down. Interesting, complex issues here. I'll also come to Hong Kong, and I'll move off from stereotyping. There again, in Hong Kong, we have the typical trend. In Hong Kong, on benevolence, rather than it going up, it also goes down linearly. Okay? So you become less wise in Hong Kong. Come back to Hong Kong a little later. Again, a pattern that is not in accord with what we would expect from traditional filial piety theory, if you like. Young people's views of older people different around the Pacific Rim? Yes, but not in the way we expected. Okay? Now the question is the intergenerational communication climate perceived to be more healthy in East Asia? And I say, well, do all the younger people's views differ in this respect? Then I hope probably. Okay. We worked off an old study we did a few years ago in HCR, where we asked young people to talk about situations they record as being satisfying and dissatisfying. We asked students, by the way, how often do you have interactions with older people over 65? Okay. Include in that grandparents. Give me an idea of your percentage. Study after study after study comes out with under 10% contact, okay, including family. Okay. So there's not a lot of contact in general, even with family, intergenerationally, which is interesting in its own right, okay, because we're talking about different cultures ultimately here. So you ask students, they say, well, what interactions do you have that you find satisfying and find dissatisfying? Well, they say, well, we got a problem, sunshine, anyway, because we don't have many interactions anyway. And they say, it's difficult to find one that's satisfying. I can tell you loads that are dissatisfying. And they look like this, okay? These were coded in the content analysis. Out of touch, closed-minded, inattentive, accusative, angry, complaining, medley, stereotyped, didn't listen. Across many studies, that occurs as a feature of older people not accommodating, okay? As we call it a factor. Also, we're reluctantly accommodated to them, okay? It's our tongue, okay? I'm obligated to feel some kind of respect. Okay? Of those that we could think of that were satisfying, and when asked to rate this in terms of satisfaction, dissatisfying was pretty dissatisfying anyway, but they say, oh, they were supportive, they listened to us. These people weren't typical older people, okay, which is interesting in its own right, and age didn't matter anyway in this situation. So what we did is we turned those accounts into scale items and asked young people in 9 different nations, that translated these data, to say how did older people, in interactions you've had with older people in general, that are not your family, you're older people in general, how did they talk to you and how did you talk to them? How did they communicate to them? In those contexts, People's Republic of China also we did. And we found, cut a long story short quickly, that Westerners reported a significantly more healthier climate than East Asians, more satisfied, more positive emotions, age mattered less, okay, and elderly viewed as more accommodating. There were big differences between the Asian contexts I had up there, but Koreans felt most obligated to be polite and bite their tongue, and construed elders as most non-accommodating. Very little differences between the Western nations, almost identical, with Canada being slightly, as one might predict, with social welfare system, more positive, but very little differences there as such. Now, what of elderly people? How do they think about the interactions they've had? They show reciprocal biases. We've got equal problems here. And if we do have an equal problem, do East Asians now also accentuate it? Do we find with you? Or is it that older people actually enjoy talking with younger people and get a lot from it, satisfying, it's non-problematic? I love talking to younger people because it makes me feel so young. Red flag to me. It makes me feel so young being sort of the norm, the anchor point of what it is to be in the lifespan. So, first of all, a quick study on stereotypes with older people. Okay? Older people, Australians here, themselves go accord with the typical stereotypes, societal stereotypes. They say, yeah, you go, you think that's something like that. Okay. Hong Kong people in the East accentuate that. Okay. And also, like the other profile, even the wisdom and generosity goes down with age. Okay. To live and die in Hong Kong, in a culture where people have been raised to respect the elder, the plight of many is so scandalous and frightening, and many stories told of when People's Republic took over Hong Kong after the Treaty with the British. Many people left their elderly family without even telling them they'd gone to Canada and elsewhere. Okay. So an interesting situation here that we've found to have the most unfavorable dynamics, if you like. Now, what we've done now, previously told you that was just looking at elderly targets. What we have now is a set of intra and intergenerational studies, because it's interesting that when people say, oh, of course you're looking old, or they point out this, do you know who does it? It's not older people. It's people my own age or a little younger. Okay? In other words, as older people, some of our problem is other older people who are making certain social comparisons that are kind of interesting. Okay? So here we have young samples looking at interactions they have with other young people, their age, and older people, and also a number of samples there where older people are looking at intergenerational interactions and also other peer older people. Major findings here, both younger and older favor their own peer age. Both find their own in-groups more accommodating. Okay? And accommodation is equivalent to non-accommodation. This in-group bias is accentuated. There's more of a problem for younger people as they see intergenerational contact than older people. Okay? This is accentuated to the extent that also young adults find the out-group older people more non-accommodating and more avoidant of older people. And as we know from previously, this is accentuated more with aging youth. Now, while elderly people, like younger adults, report their own age group as more accommodating than other age groups, East Asian people significantly have the biggest problem with their own age group. They rate them as more non-accommodating. A trend also found in the West, but hugely significant in the East. The trend there, the big trend here, that people who've been non-accommodating to me are other older people. Of course, who are other older people? If you're an older person, that's another interesting issue. I thought, them. So we have evidence in support of the communication predicament model to the extent, although we haven't done literal studies as such, but we have indication that supports the notion that intergenerational communication is constrained by stereotypes, but these stereotypes do affect the way in which people at least report intergenerational versus intergenerational contact. Question then arises for this predicament model. This does seem to hold in the Eastern context, although there are differences. Would it affect psychological well-being? Okay. Would we expect that the more young people don't accommodate you as an older person, the more problems you have with self-esteem and life satisfaction? So are these communicated experiences harmful, as would be predicted by this Western model? Okay. Admittedly, all this stuff is coming from the West. Even our scales are coming from the West, too, but I'll come to that a bit later. Well, I've got time coming later. I'm watching the clock. Our measures of health were fairly straightforward. An important measure of health, self-worth, personal self-worth. We also looked at collective self-esteem as being an older person. We looked at life satisfaction and an scale. An example being, how often do you have the feeling that there's little meaning in the things that you do in daily life? Okay. Are you useless? Okay, have you become shoved away? Are people patronizing you? Would be an example. What is their satisfaction in life? Okay. And we also use the depression scale. We only use the People's Republic, really. So with the elder people, and I use just 2 case studies here, time permitting, of Australia and Hong Kong, to see with our measures of self-esteem and life satisfaction, which we thought, well, they probably won't work, the straightforward measures, this kind of paper and pencil stuff, it probably won't work. To see whether our communicative indices predict in the different cultures life satisfaction and self-esteem. In Australia, life satisfaction is predicted by perceived accommodation from the young. The more young people accommodate to you, okay, the more life satisfaction you have, the more respect they give you. Okay. No avoidance of the young is also supported. Self-esteem, also. When I have a low obligation to be respectful to other young people or any people because of their age, you need my respect, you earn it, the respect of your age. Then high life satisfaction, high self-esteem. Okay. Predicament model, thank you. Hong Kong, interestingly enough, no communication. And in these, they do not predict life satisfaction. Maybe issues of what life satisfaction means. Riff's done some work on this. This is interesting. Life satisfaction means different things in different cultures, and we're just measuring an Anglo-Harvard. Self-esteem, however, is related to communication variables and obligation to be respectful to other elderly, ignore, and how much accommodation I get from them. In other words, my peers, how much esteem I'm getting from my peers and respect is very predictive of my own self-esteem as such. Interestingly enough, depression in the People's Republic amongst elderly people in the Han region, southeast part of China, perceived non-accommodation from family elderly, because we included in other studies, whether it's family elderly or elderly in general. If you don't get an accommodation from your family, this causes a significant amount of depression. So, elderly self-esteem is predicted about how much others accommodate to you, whether it's younger or older, depends on the culture. Life satisfaction and self-esteem in Western studies is predicted in the main by intergenerational communication, but in the East by intra-generational communication. So we got considerable work to do, I think, with our theoretical model in terms of revising it to make it more cross-culturally robust as such. So, basic answer to the question, do young people's views differ on the Pacific Rim? Yes, they do. East Asians find more filial piety and communication-wise than than Westerners, and also have less favorable stereotypes. Is the intergenerational communication climate perceived to be more healthy in East Asia? No. Okay. East Asians report more non-accommodation. Do younger and older people differ in their views? No, to the extent that both age groups find their peers more accommodating. But yes, and especially for East Asians, in that young see elderly people as more non-accommodating and elderly Asians as more non-accommodating. Is there a real social problem here? Yeah, intergenerational and intragenerational communication is predictive of health outcomes. So, what does this mean we got to do in future, and what does this mean in general? We got to develop more culturally sensitive measures in each site of life satisfaction of our communication measures. However, Mary Lee Hummett has just done a study with a colleague in China and found essentially the same findings that we found using measures endemic to Chinese culture. And very similar, there was a lot of overlap. We need to broaden our samples to both elderly and younger samples, not just younger and older samples. We need to broaden those. We need to look at other targets and health outcomes, more health outcomes, of course. And obviously, we need to monitor actual sequences of behaviors over time, which is going to be a challenge when we're dealing with so many cultures. Maybe we can explore other issues, because when do you stop doing cross? When do you stop? I mean, we're taking data from Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam because we want to go into rural communities. We've gone into Turkey and the Republic of Georgia, eyeballing the data so far, because we're still hot on trying to find a culture that will give more positive attitude in some sense. Even in rural areas, we're finding the same set of findings. Okay? And the United States comes out more positive than any of them. And look how bad that was at some level. Okay? We want to move in, we move to old people, caring for each other. Other old people, pointing out, oh, I see your hand, oh, you're good, okay? Here, try this. Okay? It's not just a province of professionals, okay? But it is, in many senses, a province for all of us in terms of caring for each other. I leave you with Orber's notion that aging seems to be the only available way to live a long time, and that understanding communication within that is very central. Hey, I've gone over a little longer, I'm sorry.
Come sit down, be comfortable. It's all right. I do that to everybody. I'm sure there's some questions that people will have about his talk, the research, the data, the theory. We'd like to ask a question of how
You've got to look at variables such as demographic variables, or the people live in their parents' side of the single family, the issue of extended family versus single parent family, the issues of whether people retire, what age they
Yeah, you can point out, of course, a whole ream of variables that have been predictive of life satisfaction as well as successful aging. Not directly have we, but in one particular study that threw a flag down in the arena you've located is one that suggested the more contact you had with older people in general, and specifically older people in your family, the more problems you had.
The more problems?
More, yeah, because you're living this with the family as well.
That's really interesting because there's a lot of research that shows that the 20 to 30-year-old generation is increasingly moving back in with families, up to 25%. And not only just here in the United States, but also a number of other cultures around the world. I would have thought that having the younger generation move in with the older generation parents would help a lot in terms of making things better. But your evidence says it's going the other way.
And maybe there has been time for that to percolate as such. Also, parallel to those findings are a massive increase in elder abuse. That's a lot of which occurs in the family situation too, and confronts these kind of the dynamics from which I'm talking about. So while one hopes that there is ultimately a panacea there, I'm not as yet convinced, but it's a complex one. You can find a lot of
One question, sorry if I mentioned. What you're just discussing, is it a matter of the difference in one generation or two generations? I mean, children...
Yeah, it's just a matter of one generation.
I found your results very interesting and also very important and relevant. And I was wondering how you got there in terms of your theoretical approach. What kind of theoretical implications or theories do you use in order to come up with your model? Is this based in research on social perception or attitude research? I'm trying to figure how you got to your model. What helped you growing there? Our guiding kind of model was the predicament model that the drain-type model of life. What got us there was what we call communication accommodation theory, which relates to how we reduce communicative and social distance between each other. And it is that led us to look at this. So it's a kind of satellite model in a brief sense from communication accommodation. Does that help, or has that kind of been... I found it interesting that it was somehow located between psychology, psychology, and communication.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, this model now has been picked up in other intercultural arenas. other than the interethnic, if you like, but being used in those who are physically challenged, but others where they're intergroup situations. This predicament model is not necessarily one totally related to aging, or those predicaments occur. So that was its basis.
Yes.
Let me first thank you for a great talk. It was a wonderful marriage of gerontology, communications, and social psychology. I really enjoyed it. I wanted to say a few words about some of the social changes that are occurring in many of these Asian countries that you study. From what we know, I think there's a tremendous change in family structure in terms of migration, and also with respect to the quality of intergenerational relationships, especially in places like China that are achieving very large strides in their modernization and economic restructuring. Could that be somewhat responsible for this finding that filial piety and all that was supposed to be?
Yeah. When we started reviewing the literature before doing this study, we found a lot of work, religious, philosophical, that relate to filial piety, and very little social scientific data. There's not putting one against the other to that extent, but what data have we got there? So it does raise questions about whether filial piety has always been out there and is a strong value. I suspect it has been. Has it always been a veneer? But now the changes you've referred to has really made that a thin crust, because, as you say, changes in the family structure. Now more people, older people, are being moved out of the home, and people are moving into the city, away from the rural areas. Family values are breaking down. There's differences in finances. Money now, purse strings aren't being held by the older people, but now finances, as indicated in Hong Kong as a good example, traditionally is now with young people, the money. Don't need to ask for it from older people. Modernization, westernization, education, focusing on young people more. There's been, I think, a sudden shift in these cultures that relates to these findings, that why it's exploded out, maybe. And that's something we're trying to look at empirically now to figure out what is that is the case. But certainly there are a number of studies coming out, one in the Journal of Cross-Cultural Gerontology that does, maybe you've seen it, that does suggest that older people in a number of Asian cultures are saying the old days of filial piety have gone. In fact, there are a number of cultures that now are resurrecting the ideal in society by having a day for the elderly, and a filial piety day and competition. Who writes the best essays? Well, who writes the best essays is one thing, so they adhere to it is another. But yeah, massive dangers, I think, in this instance.
Well, first I wanted to tell you a story that I thought you'd enjoy, and I have a question. This kind of communication can be very difficult. It can be a challenge to try to figure out what the right thing to do is as we deal with issues of aging and generational issues. We took our children to the funeral of their great-grandmother, and we spent a great deal of time trying to prepare them for the scene and what was going on, and we explained that, she lived to be almost 90, she had a bad last couple of years. This should be a celebration of her wit and all these wonderful things. And so they handled themselves, we thought, very well at the funeral, and we came back and we were staying at my parents' house. And so we're, describing things from the funeral, everything. My father became distracted and he dropped the coffee cup, which shattered onto the tile floor in my parents' kitchen. And he said, "Oh darn, that was my favorite coffee cup." And my 4.5-year-old son said, "That's okay, Grandpa, you'll be dead soon." And so my father, bless his heart,
Good.
thought this was hysterical. My mother, who was 5 years older than my father, put her hands on her hips, looked at me, and said, "You are raising one strange child." And so we explained about the conversation, about the funeral and the grandparents and everything, but I still feel horrible about this. And we were, trying to do our level best. I do wonder, though, about the mixed messages that exist in the media, because I watch my parents' friends become very nervous about a lot of things that are going on in life. And fortunately, it doesn't seem to have affected them much. But they will have heard a story on the news that says, once you're over 65 or 70, your body metabolizes alcohol differently. And so you will have one glass of wine and then you could end up, with a DWI, a breathalyzer test. The elderly are more susceptible to scams. The elderly are. Is there any good data that you've run across as you are trying to deal with this study about how to deal with issues like that with that population of people? I mean, what are the appropriate things to say? There you have
it. It is. Okay. Now, well, you've asked so many things there. Yeah. Let me do what I can to pick out a few of them. It is very difficult. We have been working on this notion of managing, and I put the word management up there. How do you deal with people who patronize you? How do you deal with people who come and call you sir all of a sudden, or madam? Even at a lower level, perhaps. And we've been finding that it is obviously a complex situation. One that seems to work a little bit is humor, and you kind of refer to that yourself. But if we can introduce humor into the situation, even relating to pharmacological issues, we might be able to get a grasp of some of the messages going on here. And I think about this because while I say we need to teach people about the lifespan, along with many lifespan people, of course, they will say, well, just don't stop at the end of the lifespan, because the next cultural group are those that have passed on. We talk about intergroup relations, those who are dead and those who are alive. Right? Can't get more intergroup than that. And so I, for what it's worth, have been with my intergenerational class in introducing notions of aging, and found now I know how to pitch it with humor that they can deal with. Okay? My next step was to say, okay, now if we're really going to understand the lifespan, we've got to have a section in here about communicating about death and how you manage it as the next cultural stage. Because understanding life, you have to understand death, and there's many people who say that more eloquently than how I've just phrased it. To understand death, you've got to understand life, and it is part of it. And if you can somehow engage and embrace the notion that this is part of the lifespan, the end part, and how you manage that end part is incredibly important when you hit the earlier part. So I would say to you, you did a good job there. Now, I'm going to fail on all sorts of things until we find out about all the complexities. But I think it's important for students and other people to, in our culture, it's different in other cultures, it's more of a taboo even in our culture, but people don't want to confront death issues. There are students, I don't want to talk about that, I don't want to talk about it. Well, when are you going to talk about it? At what point are you going to talk about it? Let's talk about it in a sensible fashion, because how you communicate with people when you contract cancer or whatever, and they will deal with you in a particular fashion is kind of complex. Now, I remember, if I may add a little story, I remember my dad saying to me, Howard, he said, I won't be here next Christmas. Okay. So, I would think emotional blackmail, I would say. Pulling the heartstrings here, he used to say for years and years. I won't be here Thanksgiving. Yeah. And so I remember him telling me about thinking about these things, and I remember him saying one day, he said, Howard, I've taken care of my finances. Okay? So your son can be okay for college, hopefully, and I've even cleaned out all the Christmas tree dressing from the loft. So when I go, you won't have to deal with it. Right? What's my natural inclination to do my next link, and they said, yeah, you've got more years left in you yet. Now, sometimes people do put that out in order for kind of other validation. You go, oh my God, I've got more years left in me, okay? Or are they giving another message, which I took to be the case, and it struck me that time. I said, thanks, Dad. Okay, that's really good, because now Robbie can go to club. We don't have to think about that, and it's really good that you've got control over what's happening, and that you are a piece of what's happening. And straight up, that's the first time I ever endorsed the message he was really giving me, that I'm okay. It's okay that I go. I really actually want to go. I've done, I've been there, done that, and I've taken care of you, so I'm in control. And they say, no, don't think about that. There's another message. So I think younger people think that older people can't deal with death issues. Okay, like in your particular case. Now maybe granddads easily deal with death, and we're finding they can easily talk. In fact, they long to talk about it in order to full closure. So I actually, he probably did an interesting thing there. That's probably a good thing. Great compliment.
I promised Vicky over here that I'd let her ask a question. Her hand was up a little while ago, so maybe you have the privilege of asking the last question since we're about out of time.
My question, when you were talking about the psychological impact, I started thinking, I was wondering if you looked at whether or not the older respondents were married or had been or had lost themselves, because I would think, and I can see in my own family, that that's a huge psychological buffer to whatever else or other insults you're suffering, is if you can still go home and the person you spent your entire life with is still with you. Because we've watched my mom's mom, who is 12 or 15 years younger than my dad's mom, age rapidly since her husband passed away, and my much older maternal grandmother is much less fearful because she's still by herself.
Right.
Like an anchor, and seems to make her less fearful as she gets older and less timid than she used to be, whereas we're watching the other one get far more timid. Did you study, was there a difference?
We haven't had a look at that in most studies. We had a lot of variables. But you've raised a huge one, okay, a very important one, particularly given there are data that suggests that one of the most distressing life events for a married woman is the loss of the spouse. Less so for men, but it's interesting with women, and that women often, if they haven't talked about it, interestingly enough, and here's where communication comes in. Before I embarked on this area of research, my wife, because she's younger than me, which is an interesting issue, because in her mind is what's going to happen to me when all Howie's, in the great lab in the sky. And how am I going to manage these various things, and the mortgages and whatever, and how are we going to manage Rob? And I used to say, like her father, I am going to live forever. And I don't want to talk about it. And she said, you so-and-so, so-and-so. Okay? Now, eventually we talked about it. We got to talk about it. And it can be initially kind of painful. I mean, what's the issue here? Because I'm being brought up not to talk about it. So now we talk about it, and we talk about it. So it's not only talking about death and other people's death, but now your own demise. And I think if one can communicatively come to terms with it, anticipate it outside a morbid frame, maybe there'd be less of the issues that you have highlighted, arguably, all very complex. And so, I had another little narrative there too. I'll tell you later when we think of it. But yeah, it's a very important issue.
Okay, well, let's put our hands together for Howie for a.
Thank you.
And before you stand up and leave, just again a reminder: if you enjoyed today, you will love tomorrow. Howie Giles at 10 a.m. in this room. 9:45 for coffee and donuts, yeah, and donuts. Thank you, Howie.
I appreciate the sentiment in the introduction. Very nice.
meant a great deal to me. How you doing? What about the